Welcome to Property Quorum. Well, welcome once again. Here we are. We find ourselves in the corner of interest, or is it misery? That is Property Quorum. And as usual, to my right is Hamish McLay of Search Convey, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, and we have one of our latest recruits, Michelle Carr, Guardian Angel of Construction, a QS that will put you straight. I'll tell you that for nothing. Today is something that's of particular interest to Michelle, so I'm expecting her to weigh in, although everybody's going to have an opinion on this one. Hard hats, hard times, financial fault lines in construction. We are peering behind the scaffold of recent headlines from, was it November the 19th in Construction News, that revealed a startling reality. Well, the first four items were about a sizable construction firm teetering on the edge of financial collapse. And it was Hamish that found this. So mercilessly, I'm throwing you straight under the bus.
Yes, after some fairly tranquil music, I think we move on to sort of something which isn't necessarily quite as tranquil for several different reasons. We all know, I mean, all of us here are involved with sort of property. With the exception of yourself, Gareth, of course. Well,
I live in one, if that helps.
You just live in, yes. We are involved in, I endeavour as much as possible just to keep my eye on some of the things that are going on in the periphery, because it does impact on what's happening. And we're all prepared for an enormous launch from our new government on tremendous sort of house building potential. And there's been a few hiccups along the way. However, there are those that go on, carry on undaunted. But it just seemed, it was one of those weird things. As I opened up and I keep an eye on construction news, just because you get some interesting things going on there. And I was absolutely astounded yesterday to find that they're mid-sized. They're not the largest of the building companies, but three of them are actually already in the serious financial lapses because they were in the hands of a receiver. And the fourth one, they were doing some downsizing in order to prepare themselves to get into that very place. And it just came as on top of what we look at an attempt to increase the rate of build that's going on. Not that these are the days at the moment, particularly when we look at the temperature at the moment, that we would be out there building. So is it a combination of the weather and the times, or are we really going through a process now where the bigger builders are going to be taking even more work away from those small and medium-sized builders?
Well, I think it'd be rude if I didn't throw straight Michelle into the mix. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I haven't read the article as yet. I just haven't had the time to do it. But there's a number of reasons that this could happen. One of the things you've got to bear in mind with big contractors and big projects is they are agreed years in advance. So I went to Sittingbourne recently, drove through an estate that had been finished probably a year ago. I worked on the cost plan for that 17 years ago. And the same with, so that's obviously a big, massive development. And there's projects, there's these big multi-million-pound projects, like there's a big one in Folkestone, and I worked on that 12 years ago. I think that's been completed for a few years now, but sometimes these projects, when I went to Tottenham Hale, there again, to see a building where you've worked on the cost plan like a decade before is quite common. So I'm not sure what the real reason is, but there's a number of things. One, the cost would have been agreed at least 2 years before the project had started, I would expect. Depends on what the contract was, and obviously we weren't expecting, I mean, some of these could have been agreed pre-COVID, like you don't know the circumstances, but they could have been agreed a long time ago. Legislation comes in, and depending on how hardcore the solicitors are or whoever was agreeing the contract, or what PQS firm, whatever it may be the fact that there isn't anything in the contract for allowing for, I mean, the cost of living, everyone, we're fully aware of how that's gone through the roof. Now that's gone through all of everything. I mean, Chris will also know how costs are going up in just for lengths of timber or whatever it may be. So smaller projects are also, the costs are going up. So whether or not they're having financial difficulties because the cost of labour and materials has gone through the roof and they don't have the ability to claim that back, whether they don't have the right commercial team to claim that back, I don't know. That could be one of the reasons. The other reason is the fact that most people have a contract, but they don't actually know how to administer it. They don't know how to claim for extensions of times and things like that. And for me, the companies that I work with, although none of my clients are sort of £500 million plus turnover, most of my clients have a turnover of maximum 15 million. I still have clients that tell me that they have got cash flow issues, but they're making 20% profit on a turnover of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 million. That doesn't make sense to me. And then when I look through their system and I actually do a report and I give them the accurate information, actually, no, your overheads are running at 22% and you're adding 20% markup. You're losing 2% on every project and you're not making any profit. And it's just the fact that they add 20% to their costs, but if their costs aren't realistic and they're not looking back to what their actual costs are compared to their tender costs and all these other things, and actually no, just because you're adding 20% markup on what you think are your costs, unless you know what your costs actually are, you're not necessarily doing.
Oh dear, I think we've lost temporarily Michelle Carr. Michelle, if you wouldn't mind disconnecting and reconnecting, I'm going to throw ball straight over to Chris. Now, these builders, I'm a bit worried, are the big ones are likely to fail as well? Surely if the small or the medium ones start tumbling, doesn't that create some sort of seismic activity further up the chain?
I mean, yes and no, Gareth. Michelle's made some really salient points in what she said so far before her mic cut out, and it could literally boil down to, well, were these companies badly run in the first place? And that could be a huge factor in determining whether or not that whether they survive or not. We've
right,
as Michelle already mentioned, we've gone through some very turbulent times after the insane amount of money printing that's been going on since really prior to 2008.
I'm actually surprised that our pound coins are worth anything at all at the moment. The amount of money printing that's been going on.
About 97% of their value's gone from what they were 100 years ago. So that's how much the currency has been debased. But that's the nature of a fractional reserve banking and monetary system that we're still insanely choosing to wed ourselves to. But that's the position that we're in, and unfortunately, I can't see it changing anytime soon. So yeah, we've got to play the hand that we've been dealt at the moment. So it could very much be that some of these businesses haven't had the cash reserves to survive, or the right management team to help them survive in these types of positions. But to go back to your question, I think some of these bigger companies, because of their economies of scale, because of the fact that they are larger organizations, you would think that they could, if they don't have those cash buffers, they could probably get the cash buffers and bring some additional debt onto their balance sheet that would help keep them afloat. And I'm not a believer in this concept of too big to fail. If you're a badly run business, whatever your business is, regardless if it's construction or banking, you should go to the wall. It's as simple as and as straightforward as that.
Yeah, ever since for me, it was ever since Woolies, their household name suddenly disappeared from sight. That shook me. And then Lehman Brothers, that was the other one. Too big to fail. Yeah, exactly. Hamish, you're the person who first read the article of all of us. What's your thoughts?
Well, I don't know quite what they are. I mean, that's why I thought, well, let's get a few people along who know a little bit more about what goes on with the building industry. But one of the things I'm fully aware of is the massive increase in price, and it unfortunately the cost of living increase hasn't been equal right the way across the board. Some aspects of it, and I know certain building materials, they have gone up far quicker and far higher, and largely because there have been shortages. I mean, it's not quite the same type of thing, but you take a wondrous little program that the Oxfordshire Highway set up to spend £10 million on a roundabout. Who the hell would do that, for heaven's sake? But they chose to do it. And there's a small stretch of road 50 metres long, which they cut off, which prevents the main Banbury Road going out of Bicester. And they cut it off. It was meant to be a couple of weeks, but they couldn't get the materials. So it stayed closed for nearly 2 months. So, you know, the amount of inconvenience that created. And of course, I would imagine by the time they got the materials, they were on site more expensive than they had been in the first place. So it's a combination, I think, of certain things, whether manufacturing is keeping ahead of it, but it's also to do, I think maybe it's the site managers would be struggling. I think Michelle outlined this. They're massive, great operations, these. Is a building site is absolutely, particularly when you get onto those larger ones, it is a massive operation, and the actual cost that's being outlaid by the builders to actually sort of get all the materials there together, or the rest of it, they're getting that, they're having to pay for that months and sometimes a couple of years ahead of when they're going to get the return. So a combination of some of these particular sort of factors, but what just sort of concerns me that we rely so much on our infrastructure. The whole building relies sort of so much on the whole of the building sector being able to actually support it. What goes on from the very, very large ones to those very, very small ones as well. Because even with Chris's developments, those smaller items, they're still very much reliant on materials and, of course, the availability of labour. So it could be a combination of both with them.
Michelle, welcome back. Just want to check I can still hear you. Are you okay?
Hello.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
She's with us once more.
Yeah, I mean, there's another thing that we're not thinking about here, and which concerns me more. It's yes, okay, the big companies are going, and again, we've had, I think every time I'm on, we discuss the same thing. It's about employing the right professionals, and whether you're a big company or a small company, you have to have the right professionals. And I've seen many big companies where they've got the wrong professionals, and people take the easy life and don't do their jobs properly, and that's where but ultimately it's always the boss's fault. So regardless of the size of your business, if you're at the top of the company, it's your fault. You need to keep an eye on things. But also what concerns me more is the smaller people. So down the line, so if these four big companies are on teetering on the edge of going bust, then what about all the smaller companies that no doubt subcontractors that haven't been paid for months and months and months and they've been fobbed off and given all these different reasons, and they've carried on working and they've carried on pushing the jobs forward, and now they're probably not going to get paid, and if they do, it's not going to be for a very long time. Are they going to survive that? Probably not. The funders will, whoever's paying for these buildings, will find a way, and yeah, it might cost them a little bit more money, but they're not going to lose out massively. But it's going to be the small people, the smaller companies, or even the labour that's going to have the difficulties potentially, or the middle people. But there's a lot more to this than just the big companies going bust.
I was thinking the other day that a lot of these medium-sized companies work with their suppliers on 30 and 60-day terms as far as credit line is
if you're lucky.
Well, yes, but I was just worried that given these times that somebody's going to catch a cold and start calling in their credit, and when they, you know what I mean, and when they potentially call a stack of dominoes, you know.
Well, it doesn't quite work like that, but one of the things that I work on with all of my clients is making sure that they do their applications properly, and not necessarily getting contractual, but having a process that if they make their application simpler, they're true and they're not overvaluing, that they get their payments done quickly. And if they're not, I'm always keeping an eye on my clients too. And there are mechanisms within the contract to send a letter, pull off site, whatever it may be, to make sure you get paid. Now, you don't want to be a pain in the backside contractor because you won't get more work, but ultimately you need to, and I've had many contractors over the years when I've been on client side or I've been working for a developer or a main contractor, and they've been fairly contractual with me, but ultimately I respect that. They keep me on my toes and I do what I needed to do, and they would get paid or they'd pull off site, but they were also delivering. So when you've got a company that delivers and they're excellent and they don't give you any grief on site because they do what they're supposed to do, they want to get paid on time, and I totally respect that. And sometimes they can be quite aggressive, but so many smaller companies are scared of being aggressive because they're scared of losing the work. But ultimately I'd rather lose the work from a company that doesn't pay me than carry on working for free and then lose all that money. Because don't get me wrong, we'll get, I don't mind getting out of bed for getting some form of money, but I don't get out of bed to lose money. And it's changing the mentality of people within the industry to help to not basically allow to be the bank or free funding for some of these main contractors. And that's what worries me more, not the fact that the main contractors, because no doubt they would have known that this was happening way before anybody else, and no doubt they've probably saved their bacon somewhere. There could be another company set up already. There'll be something along the line that they get their money, but it's the smaller people, that's what worries me, that can't survive not being paid, or only being paid 25p for every pound they're owed. That's what worries me.
It does seem to me that the changes in government haven't necessarily either helped or not helped at this stage. At the moment, it's a much of a muchness. It's just, as I've said many times before, slightly different complexion of blue, blue with a splash of red in it, perhaps. But the truth of the matter is, nothing's really changed for the buildings companies. Hamish, why don't you have the last word on this and take us home?
Well, I think we've one of those difficult situations. We don't know the answer to it any more than we know whether our current government is going to be able to actually really get off the ground and start looking at projects. I mean, I think the sad aspect is Michelle reinforced it yet again, the length of time that it takes to get projects underway and get going. And people say, oh, it's the planning. Well, it's not just the planning. There is so much that's actually sort of involved. And we really need to be getting, if we're finding that we're failing, I mean, when we look and start adding it together, we've got the big challenge with cladding. That has to be resolved. Some of the building companies have got to pay out lots of money to sort that out. And that's just standing still because there are residents in there that need to be made safe. Then we've got these other projects actually sort of coming up as well. And we've got the mid-sized sort of building companies struggling a bit. They're having to pull back. They might have to slow down their sort of development, their sort of build program. There's so much there when we know what the old domino effect's sort of like. Well, it's not quite a domino effect because basically with dominoes they all fall over. However, the domino effect we become, it just sort of they bounce into each other and they sort of stay up, and then one will teeter and away it will actually sort of go. So going forward, I think it's a matter of concern, but it is not necessarily indicating that all has actually sort of failed yet. But the government, the longer we go into the term of the government, unfortunately, I think they're not really getting political about it. It just happens to be, it is what it is. As Chris said, we have to take on board the situation and try and do our best with that particular situation. Even with materials costs going up all the time, sadly, what it does mean is those who were looking to buy properties, those who are actually renting properties, the prices are going up sort of all of the time, and there's no way of actually holding that at the moment. So hopefully we'll get some static sort of, or something stationary there that will stop all these big increased prices that are impacting right the way through society, so people can live both in safety and afford where they live.
Sadly, I fear that the only static I'm seeing at the moment is some of the noises coming out of Whitehall, which appears to be white noise. But anyway, moving swiftly on. Before I go any further, I want to draw attention to three things. We've got a whole series of posts going out for Hamish McLay called the 12 Posts of Christmas. Look out for them. They're going to be great fun. Chris Gilsenan has got a small podcast series, The Route Home Story, and one of the reasons why they're growing great guns. And Michelle Carr has got an amazing podcast series called Taking the Con Out of Construction. Chris, you might want to brush up on some of your knowledge there. It covers a lot about contract law, which I've just been learning about recently as well. If you want to watch me learn on the fly, it's probably the best place to be. But until next time, thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy day to be part of this. It appears to me that not a lot has changed, but still people are falling by the wayside. I suppose it's same beat, different day. Moving swiftly on. Many thanks to all who are attending. Try and keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars and look after that mental health. Until the next time I see you. Goodbye.